Today's video is going to be a full tutorial on how to build the ShenDrones Thicc. This is a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 4K carrying beast. It could carry the Komodo, the 4K, the 6K, whatever you need for Cinelifter capabilities. And that's kind of the goal, is to let this be a somewhat informative tutorial on how to build Cinelifter machines. So we're focusing in on the Thicc, but this tutorial can be generalized to be focused on any kind of like X8 Cinelifter sort of beasts, because they're all going to be built in a very similar way to this one. So we're going to go ahead and dive all the way into the build. I'm going to tear that bird all the way down, bring it all the way from the ground up, show you the settings, show you the wiring, show you how to do the maiden flight, maybe even get into some footage. Who knows? And that's what we're going to do. I'm really excited to share all of this content with you. I think hopefully you'll be able to learn a little bit about how to build these kind of unique-ish kinds of drones. And if you find them interesting, if you find this useful, please consider joining the Patreon or the YouTube membership, and the links in the description below for all that. Please like and subscribe to this video, and leave a comment whether or not this was helpful for you in your journey to dive onto the deep end of cinematic FPV and all that good stuff. So without further ado, let's jump into the tutorial. Since this is a rebuild and not a original build, we're gonna pretty much start from the beginning, but I'm not gonna tear it all the way down. If you can't figure out that there's standoffs in here that I've put in already, and then the rest of these are as part of the air unit, so they're gonna go in like that. You want to put those into this middle plate first, because once this bottom plate goes on, it's a little bit harder to access all of them. It just kind of is a lifesaver. And then I put two different power distribution boards on here, and the two power distribution boards are connected with some nice high gauge wire. Nice simple little design. And then basically the whole point of my rebuild is that I have some old version arms. These have really tight holes from there to there, but Andy sent me some of the V2 arms, which you can see have a lot more distance from there to there. And so it's much easier to put the motors on and off on this, because otherwise you can see that the wires basically like get in the way of these screw mounts like that. And so you have to really finagle the wiring and stuff. So this will just make it a lot easier to work on, a lot easier to maintain. So we just got to put this back together that way. In order to assemble the main chassis, figure out how to line up your battery bay with your top plate. It only goes one way because it's dead catted, so if you turn this around you can see that it doesn't match up anymore. They are offset, but if you do it this way it'll match. You can tell that the battery is also on the back side here. So essentially what's going to happen is the other pieces are going to mount on top of it like that, and you don't want it pulling on those screws, on those nuts. So a screw is going to go through here, and then there's going to be a nut here. And rather than, under thrust it pulling up on that, you'd rather have it push up into it, if that makes sense. So you want to have the grooved part of the arm facing downwards.
The easiest way I've found to make this all line up is to just put the screw through the top plate, then the arm, then the bottom, and then kind of just like stab it into the TPU, and then use a screwdriver to then get the screw to sink into the TPU. The TPU does a pretty good job of holding onto the screw, so you can kind of leave it partially assembled when you then come back and put it on.
And then you want to make sure that you have one washer on each screw inside of the landing gear. And then in order to get this nut on, I just take the nut, put it inside of my 5.5 U-blocks, and screw it on like that. Makes it a lot easier. And I'm just going to put these on enough that they stay, rather than really cranking them down right now, because I want to make sure I can get all the other arms in first. We'll do that all at the end. And repeat for all four arms. With all four arms on, the next place I like to work is the motors. So we'll put the top motors in first, because we'll have to put them through the screws up through, and then we'll put the bottom motors on with their little plates next.
All of the parts that we're using in this video can be found in the description below: the motors, the ESCs, and all of the tools, including this awesome electric screwdriver called the Wow Stick. And I figured it would be more interesting to have me just fast forward through all of the screws putting on.
After you've mounted up your motors, it's always a good thing to look inside the motor mount, make sure that the screws aren't touching the windings anywhere. These are really tall motors, so I don't expect that to happen, but it's always good to just look and make sure that between there and the actual motor that there's no screw reaching through and touching. Okay, so we've got our bottom, or essentially our top motors on. So now we've got to take these plates, or I guess these ones, put them on the bottom motors, and then we're going to mount those underneath. So let's get to that. Okay, we've got all 4 bottom motors mounted. Just keep in mind that the longer end of the tail of the thing is the back, so you want the wires to come down the long end. And now we're going to go and mount them up on the frame. So each of these are just going to go right on top of it like that. And then I'm going to take one of these screws, put it through to the bottom. Thread one of these on top, and do the same on the other end. Holy cow, this is so much easier to work on than the old version of the arms. I could barely freaking do this. And we'll just repeat that for each of these. And then tighten each one of these down, just being sure not to crush any wires between the screw and the carbon. Or carbon and carbon, I suppose. Alright, with that we have all of our motors mounted. Because this is a rebuild, I need to take a second to do some cleanup on these power distribution boards, which you shouldn't have to do. But yeah, we're well on our way. Okay, so I have all of my speed controllers pre-labeled, but the only reason for that is because I had the right wire length already and there was no need to redo the wire length, so just ignore the fact that I'm kind of cheating here.
The first thing I do is tin up each of the ESCs, make sure that they're prepared for the wires to come on by putting some of the fresh solder on there. It's a lot easier to then solder the wires of the motors on. The pads on these ESCs are a little bit small, so having everything kind of prepared before you get in there makes it a lot easier. I'm changing out the signal wires for my ESCs, so I put on new lengths of green wire for the signal wires. Before I solder the wires onto the power distribution board, we have to put heat shrink on to protect the ESC from the carbon and the outside elements. And then we move on to the motor on the other side of the arm. We clip the wires down to length, trim off the tips of the wire, and then tin the wires so that we can more easily solder them onto the ESC. So go ahead and fast forward through all 8 of the motors and ESC combinations. Just be careful with how you run your wires. Make sure that you have everything as clean as you possibly can and easy to work on. And then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, we've got all motors and ESCs wired up to power. We've got a bunch of extra cables running off for the signal wires for these ESCs. I like to use individual ESCs for this build just because the extra bit of redundancy. If something does happen, I only have to replace 1 instead of 2 full 4-in-1 ESCs. And then having these ESCs underneath the prop wash, basically because it's a 7-inch prop, these are going to be cooled naturally by the air that's coming over this. So it just kind of helps make sure that this bird stays in the air, especially when it's carrying big heavy payloads like cinema cameras. So that's kind of a part of my philosophy on this. So now I'm going to put my XT60s back on. I use two XT60s so I can run 2 separate batteries on it, and that's worked really well for me. It's saved my butt a couple times when my big batteries were not charging fast enough. I could just slap on a couple smaller ones, and yeah, so that's the way I'm going to keep doing this. I like to put 1 ESC on this power distribution board and 1 power lead on this power distribution board, just to kind of spread that load out a little bit. I'm not totally convinced that this is the best way to do your power leads. An XT90 might be better, but this is how I've had it for a while. Okay, next up we'll put the flight controller on. This is the Lumineer Lux F7.
Luckily, with the way that this is configured, I don't have to put anything on the bottom side, just the way that this bird is set up. So that's really convenient. I can just put it straight on, and I don't have to try to figure out how to get anything wired into the bottom. Just make sure it goes on with the nubbins, making sure that those don't come off. And we'll just leave it a little bit high so that's easier to get underneath it. And then our 4 corners go straight in. I like to try to kind of thread these underneath wires so that they stay down more. On the 4 corners of the Lumineer Lux F7 are each of the signals 1 through 4, and then one particular spot has the remaining 5 signals. I wanted to take a pause from the fast forward just to show you my process for making this work. I have these alligator forceps, grab that way, and then bend around, and it makes it way easier to solder that on. Then over to 2, which is 6. Just take your time thinking through where each of the wires is going to go, run it through wires, get it around things, and make sure that they're going to hold their place. Alright, with that done, we can push this the rest of the way down, get it seated on there. Everything's wired up, all 8 ESCs are wired to the flight controller. Now, the only thing that's left really that we have to do is put on the air unit, which for our purposes, we plug in the air unit here. And then basically what I have wired up here is that this is a 5-volt BEC, a Polulu, and it's sending its 5-volt out straight into the, sorry, it's a 12-volt Polulu, excuse me, sending its 12 volts straight into the air unit so that the air unit gets 12 volts because it needs, it's 2 to 4S. And then these two are going to go straight to battery current. And then the flight controller is also going to be powered from battery. So we still have to wire up the flight controller to battery, which is here. And then we'll also wire the Polulu into the battery current as well. So we'll lift this back up just a little bit to make this easier. Put a little run of positive wire here. Okay, that's on the positive lead. We'll run a ground. And we're going to run these underneath the flight controller out the side here, and they're going to fold back up over to the ground and volt on the flight controller. So that's on VBAT, and then this is going straight to ground. Clear these wires out of the way, give it a stick. Okay, then we have a little bit of a mess to deal with. The first 2 that we should get are the power and ground for the Polulu. And those are just going to share with the ones that are coming to the flight controller, so you can just put them both on the same pad over here. Then the yellow wire goes over to R2. R2 is going to be our control. It also has its own ground, which is the brown wire. So we're going to try to fish the brown wire down into here. There's a little grounding wire. Then your white cable from the air unit goes to T4, and the darker grayer cable goes to R4. And now that will have the air unit set up on the T4R4, as well as your S-bus, ground, and then power for the Polulu, which then goes back into the air unit. So now the air unit is powered, connected to the control channel, or the control UART, on the flight controller, and then we just got to put the camera back up here, which goes on nice and easy. And then I like to do 1 zip tie around the air unit, not blocking any of the ports, just to make sure it stays in place, and it also to keep that wire in place. Make sure that camera is up and centered. Now you can change that tilt very easily. It's all right there. It's all wired in. Now we're ready for the first power up. I like to go and make sure each of my motors spins at freewheels, meaning there's no FET drag, which means I would have shorted out one of the motor wires or windings, and these are all spinning freely so far. So those are good. And then now is when you would want to put in your smoke stopper. Make sure that you don't have any short circuits. I can't find mine, so we're going to kind of just go for this. And we also need some flight controller screws.
A smoke stopper is a little device that you can buy that goes between the battery and the drone and protects the drone from having a short circuit. So if there is something that you wired wrong to where it would cause damage to components, the smoke stopper will blow itself up instead of blowing up your components. So it's a really nice tool to have. And then going back to what I was saying about FET drag is basically when you have a short circuit across the ESC, meaning two of the motor wires are soldered together, the motor will not spin easily. In fact, it'll be quite hard to spin. It definitely won't freewheel. And if this is a symptom that you notice, just make sure that the pads on the ESCs that you soldered up are not bridging into one another. Maybe there's a little bit of solder blob that's connected, or there's something wrong. Otherwise, there's potentially a problem with the ESC or the motor itself.
Cool. So we'll go ahead and plug this in, see if we get any explosions. That's a pretty good sign. Air unit is on. Actually, I've got the controller for this right here. Should already be bound because this flight controller is already flashed with my firmware, but I'll show you how to do all that in a second. Okay, that's all 8 motors turning. That's a good sign. Let's go ahead and check direction on everything. Well, we got it here. So we've got motors 8 and 4 up here, 3 and 7 down here, 1 and 5 over here, and 2 and 6 up here. So we'll arm it. Motor 1 is wrong, so we need to do motor 1. 2 is wrong. Motor 3 is good. Motor 4 is wrong. Motor 5 is good. Motor 6 is wrong. Motor 7 is wrong. And motor 8 is wrong. So we got almost all of them wrong. That's okay. So we're going to reverse all of these in hardware, or in software, excuse me. And we're going to do that using BL Heli. So I'll show you how to use BL Heli to reverse all of the motor directions. And my goal, or the setup that I want, is I want to have, so we have 1, 5, 2, 6, 4, 8, 3, 7, where the inner circles are the ones on top and the outer circles are the ones on bottom. So for 2 and 4, I want them to spin in a, this one's going to go clockwise, this one's going to go counterclockwise. But then I need 1 to spin the same as 4. So I need it to spin this way. And I need 3 to spin this way, the same as 2. But the way that these motors work stacked like this is that it's coaxial. So you have 1 on top spinning one direction and 1 on bottom spinning the other way. So now 5 has to go opposite of 1. So 5 is going to spin this direction. 6 is going to spin in this direction. 7 is in this direction. And 8 will be in this direction as well. So now each set of corresponding motors is going to spin opposite of each other, and then each corner is going to spin opposite of the other. And this is called props out. And if you wanted it to do it the other way, it would be props in. So this is just the way that I prefer to do it. I do the props out with this inner set 3142 on most of my builds, and then I also do it on my Thicc just to be consistent. But it means that the motors on top are spinning props out, and the motors underneath are spinning props in. So we got to make sure that each of those line up, and that's why we made these sticky notes as a checklist. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to reverse one, and then I'm just going to check this off. And do the same for each of those. And then go back and test it again, and everything should be set up the right way. So I'm plugging a micro USB into the bird. I don't really need to update it. We're going to go ahead and hit 12 and connect. And then we're going to plug in so that all of the motors are powered up. We need the ESCs to have voltage. And then we're going to check. What check does is it goes in and reads every single ESC to know which direction each is. And we're going to start by right-clicking on one to work on one. And we know that one needs to be switched directions, so we're going to write that. Okay. Look at two. Two needs to be switched, so we're going to reverse that. Right setup. Okay. Switch to three. Three is good. Four. 4 needs to be reversed, so we're going to just do the opposite of whatever it is, right? Go to 5. 5 is good, so we're not going to do anything. 6 needs to be reversed, so we reverse it, right setup. 7. 7 needs to be switched, so we switch it, right. And 8 needs to be switched, so we're just do the opposite of what's there. Right, and now all motors should be spinning the same way. While we're in here, we'll also change our LED controls. So our LEDs that are on these ESCs can be changed, and I like to have the front ones be green and the back ones be red. So I need 1573 to be red. So we're going to right click on 1, it's red. 3 is green right now, so we're going to turn on red, right setup. 5 needs to be red, it is. And 7 needs to be red, it is now. Okay, so now our back ESCs all have a red LED, and we're going to switch the front ones all to be green. So 2, turn on green. 4, turn on green. 6, not 6, excuse me. 7, 8. We're going to turn on green. And that's it. So now we have green LEDs in the front, red LEDs in the back, and all of the motors should be spinning the right direction. So we'll go ahead and disconnect and open Betaflight again. Close out of that. Come on. While you do this. And we're going to go to Motors tab, understand the risks, turn them all on. Slowly. Okay, so now we just double check that everything worked. So 1 is now spinning the way it's supposed to. It's spinning in. Let's move this a little bit. It's going that way, you can see. So just check it off. 2, spinning out away. Check it off. 3 is good. 4, spinning out away, so it's good. 5 is now spinning in, or was supposed to be. 6 is now spinning in towards the thing, which it is. And these two are definitely spinning opposite of each other. These two are spinning opposite of each other. 7 is supposed to spin in towards the frame. It is. It should be opposite that. So that's good. And then 8 is supposed to be spinning in. It is. And it's spinning opposite of 4. So it's good. So I would say that all motors are spinning the right direction. We've double checked everything. So we are good actually to hover test this drone. So we'll finish buttoning it up and get it in the air. And actually, before we do that, let's check each motor individually, make sure we have it in the right spot. So 1 should be back right. Yep. 2 should be front right. Yep. 3 should be back left. 4 should be front left. 5 should be under back right. Yep. 6 should be front right under. Yep. 7 should be back left under. Yep. And 8 should be front left under. Yeah. Okay, cool. And then we double check that our actual screen here shows that we're supposed to be in reverse orientation, which we are. We have everything lined up with that, so we are good to hover test. So let's go ahead and disconnect. Unplug this and unplug that. Okay, so we'll finish putting this thing together. We've got our top plate. I'll show you kind of how this is assembled. I'm not going to take it apart because I think it's pretty easy to figure out. But, and they have a couple different versions of this top plate. I've used this one for the longest, and I like it. But basically, you just have to have this TPU piece like backwards and bent on. And I like to put it out on these outer ones so that I can then do the top plate as individually of the vibration plate as possible. And voila! These antennas do a pretty good job of just staying up out of the way. Sometimes I'll zip tie them, but they honestly never get down low enough to matter. And yeah, so you can actually put a battery strap through the bottom here. So what I do is I go through like this. And then you can cinch it this way. So I usually just start on the top because it makes more sense to me. And I know that I'm doing props out, so these are all pointing out. Like so. And then on the bottom, it's just going to be opposite of what these ones are. So just look at those. Okay, that's like that. Okay, now we're ready for a hover test.
For doing a hover test, I obviously don't recommend doing it inside in your garage because this is a rebuild and I already had my flight controller settings set up well. I knew my tune was going to work the way it was. I was pretty confident that everything would be fine. When you're doing a maiden for the first time, especially with a drone as complicated as this with 8 motors, arm it a couple times just on the ground, make sure that each motor is spinning the way that it's supposed to, make sure that you got your props on right, and then just take it really gradually. Just start using the pitch and roll stick to kind of push the nose forward and backwards, left and right. Make sure that it's responding to your orientation in the correct way and not doing anything crazy before you ever try to take off. Be sure to try the yaw a little bit, see if it's at least responding the right way on the ground. It should be able to kind of scoot around on the ground a little bit. And yeah, and then on that first hover flight, just get it up off the ground, see if it's doing anything weird. One of the things I would expect that it might do weird is it like has jitters, like where the flight controller is kind of freaking out. It just zzz, that sort of stuff. You don't want that, obviously. So, take your time with your first maiden flight. Make sure that everything is working the way that you expect it. Get it in the air. Do some line of sight flying. I want to do some punch outs. Obviously, I can't do it indoors. Outside, it's super windy today, so I'm not really interested in being outdoors. And just take your time. Okay, let's run through the full gambit of settings that we have for this bird. On the ports tab, we have UART4 as configuration/MSP. That is the DJI digital FPV system for like the UART communication between the air unit and the flight controller, so it sends like voltage and all that. So you gotta have that ticked on, especially if you use 4. We use T4 and R4 on the actual flight controller. That was what we used there. And then Serial RX is on UART2, and that's what makes that work. That's the control for the air unit to be able to use S-Bus from the air unit across into the actual drone. We have the DJI air unit set to use S-Bus baud fast, which we'll come back to in a bit. Under configuration, we have Octo X8 motor direction reverse. That's what gives us the props out on top, props in on the bottom. 4K, typically. Magnetometer, I guess that should be off. And my aircraft name is NERC. Then I used serial-based and then S-Bus. S-Bus is what the air unit uses for control. Scroll down, air mode's on, OSD is on. I'm not using ESC sensor, and then I have anti-gravity and dynamic filter turned on. Beacon, if you want it, it's so big that if you're not able to find your Thicc in the grass, you've really messed up. And then for motor features, D-Shot 300 or 600, I just whichever is available. We don't have to turn the roll, pitch, or yaw anywhere. It's all good. Save and reboot. Then dipping down into PIDs. I am going to share my PIDs here, and I'm glad that they might be helpful for you, but please consider that we have worked pretty hard on these and made sure that they work right for this rig, and it's really a commercial thing for us. So please consider joining on Patreon or in the YouTube memberships or something if you choose to use these. It's a big help for the amount of work that we've put into dialing this in. I hope you understand the ask there, and I appreciate it. Thank you. Then my rates, personally, 0.7 is a really slow, smooth rate. And under the filters, I leave everything pretty much default for that with dynamic filtering on. On the receiver tab, it's going to be whatever you have set up. Mine is obviously working. Whatever, it depends on your controller. If you're using the DJI Air unit, it's going to be AETR. If you're using something else, it'll be whatever that thing is set. And I leave all of these default to what they are normally in beta flight. We're on 4.1.1, not 4.2, just because I don't have enough experience with 4.2 yet. And the only mode that I use when I'm flying my Thicc is ARM, and that's just on aux 1, because there's no point in having like turtle mode, because if I put this thing down, I'm not going to try to turtle mode it, and pre-arm, there's no pit mode for the air unit. I'm not needing like launch control, and I don't use any of the stabilization modes, just ARM. Motors, we go over, there's no settings to change here. OSD, you can have your setup however you want. I just have voltage and then ARM state for this guy, and font doesn't matter on DJI. And then finally, under CLI, we need a term called SBus baud fast. Has two values, on or off. I need it to be on. On is what allows it to communicate with the DJI Air unit at that super fast SBus rate. So it's super simple. But yeah, that's all the settings that you need to make this thing happen. The ESCs are all default. The only really special sauce in here is the PIDs, which if you're a member of the Patreon, I can definitely hook you up with. And if you don't want to pay for it, that's fine. Just shoot me a message on Instagram, and I'll be able to share it with you there. I just might ask you a couple questions about what you're going to be doing with it. So that is all.
All right, I hope that was really helpful for you guys. We've gone through the entire build, all of the settings that I use, and you have everything that you need to get that thing in the air, take off, and go for a flight. All of the links for the products that we used on this thing are available in the description below. They're going to be affiliate links, so that gives me support to the channel. And also consider joining via Patreon or YouTube memberships. It's a big help for me when I'm putting out content like this for free for you guys. So thanks very much for hanging out. Have an awesome rest of the week, and stay flying.